Hey guys, sorry that this did not record with sound the first time. We're going to try it again. Today we're going to talk about the 10 biomes on Earth, or the 10 major ecosystems. Um, these can be found in your book in chapter 36. And we're going to talk a little bit about where they are, what they do, and what kind of animals and plants can be found there. Now, all of the biomes can be are based on the effect of solar radiation, which is the fact that the sun affects the winds and the ocean currents. And so, while there are many different ecosystems, there's no set boundary and defined boundary that says this is the savanna and this is the tropical rainforest. And there's like not a hard and defined line like you would see in countries. It's kind of like how Russia is part of both Europe and Asia. So if you want, you can look in your book, and there's a really good figure of the pattern of biome distribution and where they are around the world. So the first one that we're going to talk about is the tundra. It is in the Arctic region just south of the ice-covered polar seas in the northern hemisphere. And it's cold and dark much of the year. There's only about 20 centimeters of rainfall a year, so it could technically be considered a desert. The melting snow in the summer does create some pools and bogs in the summer, so that allows for some growing of lichens and short grasses, but there's always a frozen portion called the permafrost that's below that topmost layer of earth that thaws. So since there's no trees and not a lot of plant life there, there's very few animals that live there year round. For example, the ptarmigan, which is a type of bird, and the muskox live there year round. But other species like the caribou and the reindeer migrate to and from there, as do the wolves that prey on them. So they do have numerous insects and birds during the summer, but for the most part, there's not a whole lot of animal life that lives there. So the second type of biome that we're going to talk about are called the coniferous forests. And if you remember, the coniferous trees are the ones that release their seeds via cones. They're found in 3 locations in the world: in the taiga, which is in the northern part of North America and Eurasia, near mountaintops, and along the Pacific coast of North America, as far south as Northern California. The redwood forest would be part of the coniferous forests. The taiga has these cone-bearing trees like spruce, fir, and pine. And they live there because they're adapted to the cold. The leaves and the bark have thick coverings, and there's a limited understory. But birds live there, also deer, bear, moose, beaver, muskrat, along with wolves, wolverines, and mountain lions. The third type we're going to talk about is the temperate deciduous forest. This is going to be found in eastern North America, eastern Asia, and much of Europe. The climate in this area is moderate with a relatively high rainfall. The seasons are well defined, and the growing season ranges from 140 to 300 days, meaning that there's a lot of time for things to grow there. Now, the tallest trees in these types of forest form what we call a canopy, and that's where the trees form kind of a block for the sun, where they create a lot of shade. Some of the sunlight does penetrate to provide energy to another layer of trees called the understory trees. And then below that is going to be your shrubs and flowering plants, mosses, lichens, and ferns. It does provide a variety of habitats for insects and birds, and also for squirrels, rabbits, shrews, skunks, woodchucks, chipmunks, turkey, pheasant, grouse, red fox, white-tailed deer, black bear, And then this is where we start to see a large diversity of amphibians and reptiles because it's not so cold there. So after this, we're going to talk about the tropical rainforest. Tropical forests occur across the globe, and the most common type of tropical forest is the tropical rainforest. It's found in areas of South America, Africa, and India and Malaysia, right near the equator. Temperature is usually pretty steady, and the rainfall is plentiful. It's the most diverse species wise, as far as the land biomes are considered. A 10-kilometer square area of the tropical rainforest may contain as many as 750 species of trees and 1,500 species of flowering plants, and that doesn't even count all of the animals that live there. They get quite a bit of rain, about 190 centimeters per year. Um, you can find all kinds of birds, amphibians, reptiles, lemurs, sloths, monkeys, and then your big cats like jaguars and leopards. There's also a special type of organism that lives in tropical rainforests, and it's called an epiphyte. And these are plants that grow on other plants. We studied them when we looked at symbiotic relationships, and we talked about the Spanish moss. This would be an example of commensalism where one of them is using the other, but it's not harming it. So they're just using the trees to get a little bit higher so they can get a little bit more sun. They don't have large root systems, so therefore they don't need soil to grow in, but they do have roots. And so there are also tropical deciduous forests that have wet and dry seasons, and those are found in India, Southeast Asia, West Africa, South and Central America, the West Indies, and Northern Australia. They have deciduous trees. Some of them also contain elephants, tigers, and hippopotami, in addition to all the previously mentioned animals. So the next one we're going to talk about is the shrublands. If you've ever been to New Mexico or West Texas, you have seen the shrublands. They also tend to occur along coasts that have dry summers and receive most of their rainfall during the winter. There's lots of short shrubs with thick evergreen leaves with large cuticles. And remember, cuticles were to prevent the loss of water. They are adapted to withstand those arid conditions and also quickly regrow after fire. In fact, some of their seeds require fire to be able to germinate. You can find things like coyotes, jackrabbits, gophers, and other rodents there as well. The dense shrubland that occurs in California is known as the chaparral, and this type of shrubland is called Mediterranean because it lacks an understory and it's highly flammable. So this explains why there's lots of wildfires there in California. The next one we're going to cover is grasslands. That covers most of Oklahoma. And it occurs where rainfall is greater than 25 centimeters, but generally insufficient to support trees. So mainly the mid to western sides of Oklahoma. Natural grasslands once covered more than 40% of the Earth's land surface, but most of those areas are now used to grow crops. You have two types. You have the temperate grassland and the savanna. The temperate grasslands are going to include the Russian steppes, the South American pampas, and the North American prairies. Things you'll find there are going to be bison, mice, prairie dogs, rabbits, those kinds of things. And then you have the savannas, which are the grasslands in Africa. There's one tree that can survive the dry season, which is called the flat-topped acacia. We talked about that when we talked about ants living in their thorns. And there's a tremendous variety and number of animals that live there: elephants, giraffes, antelope, zebra, wildebeest, water buffalo, rhinoceros. And then there's also the carnivores like cheetahs, lions, hyenas, and leopards. Next, we're going to talk about deserts. They're usually found at latitudes about 30 degrees, either north or south hemispheres. And rainfall is less than 25 centimeters. Days are hot and nights are cold because there's no plant life to capture uh, that heat during the day. Um, you will not find very much vegetation in a desert, but there are some, like for example, cacti, which have their special type of photosynthesis that they go to. And then there's many desert animals that are nocturnal, and so reptiles, insects, also some running birds like the roadrunner, and some rodents like the kangaroo rat, and then coyotes and hawks. Now we're going to start talking about aquatic ecosystems. Those are going to be either freshwater or saltwater. There are some brackish water, which is a mixture of fresh and salt water. But the first one we're going to talk about are lakes, and their bodies of fresh water. They're usually nutrient abundant, and uh, they are categorized as either oligotrophic, which means that they don't have a lot of nutrients, or eutrophic, which means that there's lots of nutrients. And they're usually situated in naturally nutrient-rich regions, or they're enriched by agricultural or urban and suburban runoff. Um, they're in temperate environments. Deep lakes are stratified so that your fish can survive through the winter. So uh, the warmer temperature water is at the bottom, and that's where the fish go when ice uh, goes over the top of the water. Um, you will find lots of different organisms that are aquatic there, but then you also find things like waterfowl and shorebirds that live there as well, that either feed on the fish or feed on the plant life around those lakes. Then you have the coastal zones, and there's two types of coastal zones. There's estuaries, which is where the fresh and the saltwater meet and mix. And so the organisms that live there have to be able to withstand that mixing of water because it's very turbulent. And then also being able to change their cellular ability to get rid of water when it's either really salty or very fresh water. And then we have seashores, which are usually going to be either sandy or rocky. You can find lots of different animal life there as well, like brown algae, oysters, mussels, snails, and lots of different ghost crabs, stuff like that. Now, the last one we're going to talk about are oceans, and they cover approximately 3/4 of our planet. Um, there are many divisions. There are 4 divisions of the ocean, and there are different animals that live at each depth of the ocean. You have the epipelagic zone, where you have like sharks and dolphins, squid, and then your phytoplankton and zooplankton, which use the sun, obviously, to uh, become producers. Then you have the mesopelagic zone, which has like your giant squid, your mackerel, your shrimp. Then you have your bathypelagic zone, where you have things like anglerfish, deep sea shrimp, and even sperm whales, and then the hagfish that we talked about when we talked about chordates. And then at the very bottom, you have the abyssal zone, and that's where your brittle stars, your sea cucumbers, and your glass sponges are going to live. All of the different zones are based on either sunlight or some sort of heat that they receive via either the sun or there's things called hydrothermal vents, and that's where seawater goes through the cracks in the Earth's crust and is heated to about 350 degrees. Um, and there's very few things that live there, but our archaea bacteria that we talked about when we talked about different domains do live there. So I hope that this has helped you understand the different ecosystems If you have questions, bring them to class. And again, I'm sorry that the first one did not work, um, but I will be happy to answer any questions on Wednesday.